Hey friends, how's it going? It's Michael Parker and welcome back to Michael Parker Media. On January 20th of this year, on Donald Trump's first day back in office, he signed a pardon and a commutation for all offenses related to the events at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. One of those people is here with us today. His name is Shane Jenkins. Shane spent 1,418 days in prison for his involvement in January 6th. He is now the founder of Stand in the Gap Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to advocating for change in reentry, family services, and justice reform. Shane, you're a free man. Welcome to the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
I've been watching a lot of interviews with you and hearing your story. And you were a troubled teen. You had run-ins with the law. You were incarcerated for a few times. And at one point in your incarceration, you accepted Christ, became a Christian, and you're kind of getting your life back together. And then along comes January 6th. So tell us about your life prior to January 6th, and then we'll get into that day and the fallout.
Yes, sir. Prior to January 6th, I would say I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. What I felt was a pretty normal family. Went to private school in West Fort Worth, a school called All Saints Episcopal School. Got a good education up to the sixth grade. Then we moved to New Mexico for about 3 years. While I was in New Mexico, about age 12 to 13, I found out I was adopted, and this really did pulled put a number on my psyche. It was the formative years of how you come to understand and see yourself in the world. And then at that point in my life, in that growth, somebody jerked the rug out from underneath me. And so I felt betrayed by my adopted family. I felt like they had been lying to me the whole time and keeping something from me. Then I felt abandoned and thrown away like a piece of trash by my biological mother. And so I was this wounded, angry young man, and I turned away from my family and from school and sports and started running the streets and doing the wrong things, skipping school, dropped out of athletics and stuff like that, and started getting in a lot of trouble in New Mexico. So much so that they asked my family and I, they said, if you guys will leave New Mexico or leave Ruidoso, we will dismiss all the charges against you. And so we left and went back to Texas. And age of 15, I committed aggravated robbery. I robbed a guy at knife point at a gas station, took his car, and drove it back to New Mexico because I wanted to be there with my friends. And so I got arrested for that, extradited back to Texas, um, got put on probation, started running around with some negative people in the Fort Worth area, gang members. One night they got jumped by a rival gang, and after that, I ran into them at a parking lot of an Albertsons, and they picked me up. I got in the car with them, and as we were leaving, the people that jumped them drove by, and they pulled up next to them on the road and shot the driver, pulled out a gun and started shooting into the bed of the truck that held about 6 people, and I'm just in the back seat of the car, and he starts shooting. He shoots a whole clip out of the gun and kills a guy who's 16. I'm also 16 at the time, and shoots 2 more people and I'm just in the car with him. And so we all get arrested for that eventually, and I end up getting 3 years as an accessory. They charged me with attempted murder as a juvenile, but I was just in the vehicle. Again, I didn't do anything. And so the driver got 40 years, the passenger got 10 years as adults, and I got 3 years as a juvenile. I went to the Texas Youth Commission in Gainesville State School, did about 3 years there. Really kind of made some changes in my life. Got a certified at welding, got my GED, got my high school diploma, got back into sports, played baseball, played football and basketball in there. They were taking us out. We were actually in the Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools. They would load us on a bus and take us to play these other private schools. So we actually got to play against All Saints, which I went to as a as a young man. And so got out of there when I was 19 and went from there straight to the University of North Texas because I had an opportunity to play football. My coach inside the prison knew the head coach at UNT and felt like that I was a fit there. And I went. Didn't last very long at school because I had been in that strictly controlled environment in juvenile prison, and went from there to a college campus with a bunch of other 18, 19, 20-year-olds who'd just gotten away from their parents for the first time.
And we're going nuts, probably.
Yeah, and beer and alcohol and girls, and I was just like not prepared for that. So I dropped out of school, moved back home to my mom's not long after that, and then my adopted dad had died, I guess right before I went and did those 3 years. I guess I was like 15, 16. Around that time my adopted dad died as well. when I got out, like when I came home to my mom, she was getting remarried to my future stepdad, Wesley Selman, and everything was fine. I attended the wedding and everything, and then come to find out, he's a real bad alcoholic and drug addict, and things just went really, really bad. I was working 2 jobs, working for Laidlaw throwing garbage. I was also working for Home Depot, and then at nights, I was doing valeting cars in Dallas, and so I was gone all the time. Well, in that time, in those times that I'd been working, my mom had been beaten by my stepdad on 2 different occasions. He had been taken to jail for beating my mom, and I didn't know any of this, and she had hid it from me. I found out at a later date, but things started to escalate at home, and my mom expressed her fear to me, and he had pulled a gun on me at home, and just a bunch of different things happened. Finally, I came home one night, and then he pulled me to the side, and he said, "Shane, you need to move out." And I was like, because this is a guy that moved into my mom's house with like 2 trash bags full of clothes and, like this is my mom's house. It's not, don't get it misconstrued. This is not his house, right? And so I tell him, look, I'm not leaving unless my mom asks me to leave or I get this funding that I was waiting for from the time that I did in jail. They were going to pay for my apartment for 6 months. So I was waiting on that. And I told him that. I said, I'm not. And he got mad and went upstairs. And I was like, went upstairs and I hear him yelling at my mom. So I go up there and I tell him, like, look, we had a conversation that was between you and I, had nothing to do with my mom. I'm not leaving. My mom's not asking me to leave. And I said, so please just let it go. Well, he threatened to kill me while I was up there. And I was like, look, I'm not going to get into this with you right now. Just peace, just stop. And so I left and went downstairs and he threatened to kill me. So later on that evening, I hear him and my mom upstairs fighting, um, physical. I hear my mom scream, and I grab a gun from downstairs in the front closet by the front door, and I run up the stairs. And when I get up there, I hear my mom screaming, and I hear him, effing this and you stupid B and C word and all these things, right? And I'm just like standing there at the door, and I'm like, this is the woman who, you know, adopted me and gave me life, in my opinion, and I was like, "I just can't continue, and I'm afraid of what's going on in there." So I finally just I kicked the door down. When I do, he's laying in bed with the shotgun pointed at the door, and he raises up and says, "MF, I'm gonna kill you." And he shoots like at me at the door and blows the top of like it's above my head about 6 inches, blows the door frame off with a 20 gauge shotgun. And I run downstairs and call 911. And while I'm down there on the phone, my mom comes down and tells me, don't call the cops. He was just trying to scare you." And I'm like, what is going on? I'm on the phone with 911. My mom's standing here and I've got a gun in my hand. And I'm like, they're like, "Can you get out of the house?" And I'm telling him, no, I can't. And so here he comes. "I'm coming to get you, boy." It's like some bad movie. Like, "I'm coming to get you, MFer," and this, that, the other. And he comes down the stairs, and as he comes at me, he gets down to the bottom of the stairs, and before he can turn that corner to come to me, I just start shooting through the second story support. I end up shooting 13 times. Really, I shot 7 times, he shot once, and then I shot 6 more times. He falls down the stairs, ends up dying on the way to the hospital. Police show up, and, the I'm on parole for this attempted murder the murder that my friends did, but I'm on parole for it, and the homicide detective tells me, he's like, "Well, we've listened to the 911 tape. We've got the statement from your mom, statement from your sister, and all these things. And are you on parole or probation for anything?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "For what?" And I said, "Attempted murder." And he goes, "Crap." And so,
Yeah.
so they take me downtown, and I'll never forget the officer that showed up on the scene and put me in handcuffs. He was a chaplain. And he was telling me about his faith in Jesus Christ, and just it was one of the first times I realized, now I look back on it, that Christ was like reaching out to me, trying to save me. And so he takes me to the jail. Long story short, I end up doing 15 days in jail. And about 90 days later, the grand jury no bills me for murder. They charged me with murder at 20 years old. And so here I am, 20 years old now. I've killed somebody by my own hand. I've watched my friends kill people and witnessed it, and then I've had an identity crisis as a teenager. And this shooting of my stepdad was something that really I couldn't reconcile spiritually or emotionally. Somebody that I live with, somebody's dad, somebody's son, he was a Vietnam War hero, all these things. And it just really tormented me that I had taken another person's life. Whether it was justified under the eyes of the law, but it was something that just weighed down on my spirit. And I had a hard time dealing with reality as a result. And so I turned to drugs and alcohol, which led to a further in my life of crime was doing drugs and alcohol. So I started selling drugs to supplement that lifestyle and ended up in and out of prison 3 different times as an adult after that period. And in 2016, gave my life to Christ after my mom had died. That was the beginning of the change in my life, right? So gave my life to Christ, started digging into his word and really like the foundational elements of Christianity, like where he knew us in our mother's womb, knew the hairs on our head and all these different things was really what gave me the foundation for my politics. Because at that point I started to see the value in myself that, the world, my adopted mom may have not loved me, but I know God loves me, right? And so then I started thinking about the unborn in the womb, and I started thinking about the pro-life movement and all these things, and I was like, these are special beings that God has created, and that has value, So I started to see my politics sprang from that, right? And so then I watched the persecution of Donald Trump from 2016. I got out of prison finally 2018, moved to Houston, Texas, became a part of a prison ministry, got hired on staff at a nonprofit called Charm Prison Ministry, and then served a year there, then went back to the oil field in West Texas where I had worked previously. And then when right before COVID hit and all that, I was going on days off and my nephew was a supervisor out there, and I was leaving, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going on days off. Where am I going to be going to work when I come back?" And he was like, "Well, you're probably not coming back." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm not coming back?" And he said, "Well, OPEC and Russia had a price war." Well, OPEC wanted Russia to join OPEC and become OPEC plus, and Russia
Yep.
was like, "We're not doing it." And so overnight, the price of oil got cut in half, and then like a week later after that, they went on COVID lockdown. So now even the price of oil is already cut in half, and then demand goes down because nobody's traveling, everything's locked down. So it even deflated further, and so I lost my job, went home, and by this time I had a mortgage and 2 vehicles, and now the bottom drops out of everything, and I'm like, "How am I going to play for the guy who's been in trouble like I have, the oil field is phenomenal for being
Yep.
able to generate income, and so I really started paying attention to politics. I was working 2 jobs and doing all these things, but really dug into politics and wondering how can we get told to take this vaccine and lock down and all these things like this, and I was just like, really my mind started getting opened and just paying attention, like I was woken up, you know what I mean? And so I got off parole in December of 2019, but started paying attention to all the politics and all that. Voted in the 2020 election. First time I'd ever voted in my life. First time I'd ever wanted to vote, And I knew Trump was pro oil field, pro oil and gas, and so I was like, I definitely want him on there, in there again. And then I watched the election. I voted early in Texas, but I watched the election November 3rd, and I just was like, all night, Trump's in the lead, Biden's trailing. It just seemed like the whole night, right? It was
Yep.
pretty close, but Trump was in the lead. It looked like the whole night. And then I go to bed like 10:30 or 11, and I wake up the next morning, and they're like, Trump lost. And I was just like, what? Like, what is going on? And so next month, Trump sent out that tweet, come to DC, join the Stop the Steal rally. And then it said, will be wild and all caps. And I was like, I've looked back on that so many days, and I'm like, if he had not put that in all caps, like will be wild, I don't know that I would have gone to DC that day.
When I saw that he was saying come to DC, I was already concerned. I'm like, oh man, I don't think this is going to go well. And we're going to put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to that later in the interview. I was like, this feels like a setup to me. And those of you who don't like what I'm saying, to me, this felt like a setup, and I thought it was a dangerous situation. But at the same time, I had friends who went and they got caught up in it as well. None of them eventually had to go to jail, but they witnessed what happened firsthand. So let's just talk about now. So you've made this decision. You're going up there. You're at DC. From my understanding, you watch all of Trump's speech. And so you were not part of the first set of events that happened at the Capitol.
No, yeah, I stayed all, and that's why, I wanted to go to DC because this was January 6th. If nothing happens and the election stays as it is, January 20th, Trump will be out of office. And I figured probably we'll just ride off into the sunset. And so I wanted to see him speak as president, and I'd never been to see DC to see the history of the city. And I've always had an interest. As I've gotten older, I've found the value in history and just and stuff like that. So I wanted to go appreciate all that. And never been to a Trump rally, never, and I've never been to a political rally, period. So I wanted to go participate in all that. And, it was something that was a beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. On the way to January 6th, I had a layover. I flew from Houston to Dallas and had a layover, met a family of friends of mine now that supported me the whole time I was locked up for January the 6th. But I shared my testimony like I kind of just shared it with you. And the dad of their family stayed home, and they were like, "Would you mind being our protector for the trip?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I would love that." And I didn't have any. I went alone to DC. I was concerned, and I was concerned about the election. And
Yep.
I feel like we have an obligation as citizens. Like if you are concerned, like it's not okay if I feel like they're stealing the election. It's not okay with me. It's not like, "Oh, we'll just get them next time." And in retrospect, I look back at it and I think about Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungry and all these people that lost their lives as a result of this stolen election.
Yep.
The fentanyl overdoses, just the suffering from inflation, the suffering from all the people that hurt people coming across the border, or the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and all those veterans that died. Like I just can't all of those things could have been stopped if people just stood and stood firm and said, "We're not gonna accept this election. We want a new election," or whatever. It wasn't there was a part of me, yeah, I wore a 1776 hoodie to January 6th, and part of me was like, we've gotta not there's no we could attack the Capitol and do whatever, but that's not gonna take over the government. It's not gonna change anything. So that's not it wasn't ever a solution in my mind. Protesting and demanding an investigation into January 6th, sending the electors back to the states to do an investigation in the questionable states, whether it was at Georgia or the swing states, to take a honest look at that, because I believe that election integrity and faith in our elections is vital to this participatory democracy or the republic. I think you have to
Agreed.
have. If you don't have faith in that, then if you don't believe that your elected officials are actually elected, then what are we doing here? Because that's a scary and dangerous place to be, I think, as a country.
Well, the day that this happened, I'm watching it from home. My wife and my daughter are in another room watching it on television. I was like, I can't watch this on television. I'm going to watch it on my computer from other sources. And I'm watching all of this really strange stuff that doesn't make sense to me. And then there's the way it's being portrayed by the media. So, one question I guess I would ask to you, what was the atmosphere of the crowd in your impression? Was it boisterous, or was it reverent and then something turned? What was your feeling on the temperature of the crowd?
Well, at the ellipse, and I kind of got sidetracked to the last question, but at the ellipse, at the rally, like it was a spiritual, it was like a concert. I know you're a rock and roll guy. It's like a concert atmosphere, but
Yep.
it was like a church uh kumbaya. It was just a beautiful thing. It was singing and dancing, and people were there. People were upset about the election, but it was more a thing of like joy. I felt energized, like, being there. It wasn't some, like, "We're so mad, we're gonna go just burn the whole city." There was nothing like that. It was families and people, just patriots gathered together. So there was not little did we know that there's people at the Capitol taking down the ski fencing and removing the bike racks
Yeah.
with their COVID masks, that the police are watching them, allowing them to take down all the trespassing signs and all these things, that are preparing for the crowd to come mosey through there unknowingly, breaking the law by trespassing past this point that they've removed all these barriers from. This is another thing. I actually left from the Trump speech with my friends that I met, went to their hotel so they could freshen up and use the restroom. I went to Starbucks and got coffee and protein packs for everybody. And then they came down and said, "Oh my gosh, they've stormed the Capitol." And I was like, "I've got to go. I don't know what's happening, but it's happening, whatever it is." So I ran to the Capitol then, but it wasn't from what I there was no urgency, or I wouldn't have gone to Starbucks.
Starbucks.
Yeah, like, I'm gonna go take over the government, but let me stop at Starbucks on the way.
And get some coffee first.
Yeah. So I didn't witness anything untoward. I didn't even hear people with the rhetoric like Ray Epps saying, "We're going in the Capitol," or this, that, or the other. That was not something that had entered anybody's mind or mine either. But it changed whenever, we got down to the Capitol for sure.
I was watching this documentary yesterday trying to, get back on top of all this. I believe it was called January 6th, The Timeline. And so it was like minute by minute. And you've probably seen this. But there was things that they showed, and some of this was different points of simultaneous different angles. And a lot of things happened that I kind of forgot about. But then there's also things that I feel like I remember from it happening that were not depicted in this documentary. At one point, one of the strange things that I saw that day was, and I saw that a lot of people put this on the internet. There was these paramilitary looking dudes, like guys in black, being escorted through the crowd by law enforcement. Did you see anything like that?
Yeah, so there was and there's not a documentary. I used to listen to what is it? I think it's RT, Russian radio in DC while I was in the DC Gulag. There's a
I
guy
know RT, yes, Russia Today.
Okay, there's a guy named Larry Johnson who did a bit. He is a former CIA guy, but he said he had proof that this lady named she's a Democrat Party person. Chalupa is her last name. I can't remember her first name, but she was a part of the Russia collusion thing. Well, that
Mhm.
he said he had the receipts on them bringing 50 Azov Brigade Ukrainian Special Forces members, hotel rooms, flight tickets, and all that, and video of them at the Capitol. So there, and if you, I've witnessed a lot of things where there was like the "Don't Tread on Me" flags,
Yeah.
like, through the crowd in a perimeter, like, evenly spaced out. There was people with blue armbands or, like, a yellow reflective tape or orange reflective tape, and they all had it in the same places. There was definitely teams working in the crowd as groups and moving. After I didn't witness this the day of, but after sitting in the DC jail for 32 months and they gave us that 16,000 hours of footage, a lot of the guys being former military and stuff like that, we sat down and just dug through all of this stuff, and there was a lot of very questionable, behavior, not to mention in the DC jail. While I was in the DC jail, I interviewed a self-avowed Antifa member. He wrote me out Landon Copeland wrote out a letter that he asked me to because he knew I had some connections to the press, asked me to release this to the press, and he told me firsthand that he was at January 6th with 18 other Antifa members. That
To
and we
instigate.
yeah, we sure went and looked, and they're cussing out the cops, throwing water bottles at the police, provoking the police, and then, that may have been what led to the police attacking the crowd, or I don't know, but there was definitely it's January 6th was not organic. It wasn't nobody had a plan. The Oath Keepers it was ridiculous. They said because they put their hand on each other's shoulder that they were using military tactics when they were going through a crowd, and I was just like, they were using the stack formation because but they had none of them had weapons. The Proud Boys didn't have weapons. The Proud Boys didn't even go in the building for the most part. One guy went, but none of the main Proud Boys went in the building. So for them to say that there was like an orchestrated plan, I don't think there was an organic plan. I believe it was. Our government is specializes in color revolutions and all these other things we see all around the world. I would bet every penny that I have that there was every alphabet agency in there with different teams, whether it was cooperative informants or whatever it was, different groups manipulating the crowd. And because there is a psychology to how the crowd moves and operates. But
Oh,
yeah, so
absolutely. Mob psychology is a thing, and I just remember in the days afterwards, I was looking at this, and I think I have a pretty keen eye for when things are not on the up and up. And I just remember the first day I'm seeing these guys, these young men, all dressed in black. I'm like, look, if you're all dressed in black at an event like this, I mean, to me, that's a pretty clear sign that you're probably up to no good. But then to see them escorted by law enforcement, and ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this on YouTube later, or you hear a podcast and you don't agree with me, feel free to bring it up because it's been 4 years. But I just remember at the time thinking that's really weird. Why would these people be involved? And then there was another famous picture in the days right after where there was this guy hanging off, I don't want to say the balcony, was it a balcony, within the Capitol, who again was in this full, like, it looked like black tactical paramilitary gear. I'm like, I don't know. It just seemed very odd to me. I do not have the answer. Maybe there is a legitimate answer for why that individual was there and what that person was doing, but I don't know. It still sticks in my craw.
have you seen the people changing out of their black gear and changing into Trump gear in the bushes and stuff like that? There's videos out there of these people, somebody walking by and they're filming them and they're changing clothes in the bushes. And there's like people that were around Ashley Babbitt, Zachary Alam, for one, that changed clothes on the stairwell right by where she was shot. Like, this is very questionable behavior. It's not something that's just a Trump supporter that went to go protest was going to like have an extra change of clothes to change into because they might be concealing who they are or
Yeah.
their appearance or it's just so unusual. And there's so many layers to it that I can't wait for them to do. I hope they delve into a major investigation into what happened on January 6th.
Well, I do too. And because it is important, because in the days after this, it was portrayed, some people had the gall to say it was worse than 9/11. I'm sorry. 3,000 plus people died on 9/11. This was an attack on our soil, and we could go down that's a whole other subject. But just to compare this to that, to me was really atrociously incorrect.
For sure. Well, and they said it was worse than 9/11. It was worse than Pearl Harbor. It was worse than the Civil War. It was worse than the Holocaust. And I'm just like, are you like, it was, I can't imagine. Now I see why Joy Reid and all these other people are getting fired. It's just the over the top, ridiculous rhetoric that these people use to inflame the American people, and these people that I think in general, like there's 20% on the left and 20% on the right that pay pretty close attention to what's going on in the world. But I think the 60% in the middle are the ones that get deceived by this mainstream media narrative because they don't have time. They're working, living their lives. They're not steadily focused on anything, and they're just kind of getting these just these ads or whatever it is, these news bites, and they're seeing all this stuff. They're saying, "Oh my God, 15 police officers died, or 12 died, and then 7 killed themselves after January 6th." And there's no truth in any of that. Like no officers died on January 6th. Brian Sicknick died the next day, according
Right.
to the medical
Right.
examiner, which had nothing to do with January 6th. 4 protesters did die on January 6th. Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boylan, Kevin Greason, and Benjamin Phillips. I mean, those are facts, but people, the mainstream America doesn't know that, and they need to know that.
So tell us, spend a few minutes talking about that experience of being part of it. Did you go
Yeah,
in the Capitol?
I did not go in the Capitol. I made it into the lower West Terrace Tunnel, which is the tunnel that the president comes out of
Yeah.
on inauguration day. Typically, not this year it didn't, but yeah, and so whenever I leave the Starbucks and make my way down to the Capitol, they have these temporary stages set up around the lower West Terrace because that's where the president will be sworn in. And it looked like somebody had kicked an ant bed, and these people were just like climbing up. Oh, and I was like, what is going on over here? And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I see the crowd making their way up to the lower West Terrace, and I was like, I'm going to go see what is going on. And so I climb up to the lower West Terrace, and I'll never forget, I get to the wall to climb over the wall to go to the lower West Terrace, and I hear this whisper in my mind, and it's like, Shane, this is dangerous. And I stopped for a second and I thought about why am I here, right? I'm here because I want to protest and I believe the election was stolen, but I was like, I'm here for my children, my grandchildren, and future generations. Like, I don't know what's happening, what's going on, but I know that I want to stand for what's righteous and what's right. And so I felt like if not me, then who, right? Because I'm going to go up here and I'm going to see what's going on. And so I climb over the wall and I made my way up to this window to the left side of the lower West Terrace tunnel, and I'm standing there watching. And by this time, there's police all the way out to the front of the tunnel, and the crowd's just kind of milling about, standing there, and they're not doing anything. Well, then the crowd starts pushing back, and when you hear this heave ho, and the crowd starts pushing against these police officers, and they're pushing back, and then people start getting hit and beat with the batons, and then pepper spray comes out, and it just kinda gets it just devolves into chaos, and I start seeing, like
They put a hole in the cheek of one guy with a rubber bullet. And in this documentary I was watching yesterday, you see it close up. I mean, he's got the hole in his face. And one thing I was going to get to that I mentioned earlier is like in this documentary, because they're cutting between the crowd and the police. And at one point, a couple of these police guys are saying, they set us up. They set us up, implying that they were going to take the brunt of this and did not have the full resources to deal with it.
yeah, well, and if there's a book that Troy Nels wrote, and he talks about the government intelligence agencies release these reports to the Capitol. There was 3 reports that were released to the Capitol. I don't know, Sergeant of Arms, Nancy Pelosi, those people that were in charge of security at the Capitol, and they said there's a very high likelihood that there will be violence at the Capitol on
Yep.
January 6th. And they're taking all these phone calls and recordings that they're hearing from their intelligence agencies, and they're saying, look, there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and violence is imminent, and these people refused the National Guard. On January 6th, there was 200 out of 2,000 Capitol Police on hand. If you had reports stating that there's imminent violence at the Capitol expected, Why would you not have all hands on deck? You would take resources from the DC Metro Police, the National Guard, anybody who can be there, set up a harder perimeter, something. You would think. Instead, they had limited, very limited skeleton crew of Capitol Police officers. They had no DC cops intervening around the perimeter of the Capitol, and they refused the National Guard. The conditions were intentionally laid for the trap.
It feels like that. What is your thoughts on Ray Epps?
He's got to be. I mean, I can't imagine that he's not, especially the more the I think the more not his behavior was definitely suspect, but more his response to the allegations against him, and
Yeah.
then the way
And then he skated entirely.
then the mainstream media jumped to his aid,
Yes.
and then he skates entirely on all the charges. Lets me know all I need to know, that he's definitely somebody's asset. He's working for somebody. I don't know if it's the DIA, the CIA, the FBI, who it is, but he's somebody's asset.
Yeah, he showed up in numerous the night before, he's telling everybody, "Hey, we're gonna go into the Capitol." The next day, he's trying to fire up everybody again. He seems to be at all these pivotal points. And look, to those people who've been following this, what I'm saying is not new to you. You know this, but how many people were arrested? 1,400?
1600, around 1600.
And this guy somehow gets out of it when he's clearly on camera saying we're going to go into the Capitol, and he's confronting police very belligerently so at these barricades in numerous places. I mean, look, I don't know how to get around that. I don't know how to think that he was not involved in this somehow, and then to be allowed to just completely get off scot-free makes no sense to me.
Well, and how many January 6th defendants did the mainstream media give a platform to and jump to the aid of?
Yep.
He's the only one I ever saw go on 60 Minutes or that got a platform, and then he got no time or no anything. So,
Well, let's skip ahead to you were then after all of this happens, you are arrested in Houston, correct?
sure.
And
March,
when were you finally arrested?
it was March 5th, 2021. So about 2 months later.
And so did they immediately send you to the DC Gulag, which is I have the name of that facility. I'm sure you can give it to me. Did
The
they
DC,
send you straight there?
yeah, the DC DOC, we call it the DC Gulag. But yeah, no, so I was arrested in Houston by Houston SWAT and the FBI, taken to the Federal Detention Center, Houston, FDC Houston. And I spent about 30 days there. I was locked in the cell the first 11 days I was there and not allowed out of that cell at all. No, I mean,
Solitary?
yeah, I was taken from the streets and put in a cell. No telephone, no showers for 11 days. I didn't get a telephone call for like 30 days, but so imagine you're out paying bills, credit cards, this, that, the other, working all this stuff, and you just get locked in a cell. And I'm in there trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to hire an attorney? What am what bill is due today? What day is it? All these things. And so I spend the first 30 days in Houston, then they load me on Con Air. I don't know if you know that Con Air is a real deal.
Yep.
And they locked us in the black boxes, which usually handcuffs you can turn like this, but they put a black box on you so you can't move it's very uncomfortable to ride in, but they put the worst of the worst in those black boxes, and most of the January Sixers got those. But they flew me to Oklahoma City. I spent about a week there at Grady County. Then I was flown from there to Northern Neck Regional Jail. I think that's in West Virginia. And then I spent about 10 days there. And then I was taken to Washington, D.C., where I would remain for about 30 and a half months.
I was watching an interview of you with Cash Kelly, and I know he served along with you. Tell me what it was like to be in the DC Gulag with all of these fellow J6ers, some of whom had no prison experience in their life at all. Some of them were actually law enforcement. Some of them were professionals. Tell me about that being inside with all of these folks.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. Somebody like me, I know what to expect. I've experienced loss in prison, but what I haven't experienced is being trained by the government, serving the country, putting my life on the line for the country, and then being persecuted by those same people. And so I watch these men, Green Berets, Army Rangers, Marines, regular Army, National Guard members, whatever, law enforcement, prison guards, just everyday, I call them civilians, professional people lived honorable, good lives, have wonderful families, home. And then they come to jail and they're just prosecuted. They're persecuted. We're thrown in this DC jail, denied haircuts for a year, visits for 2 years, religious services for 2 years. And we've got the full force of the DOJ coming down on us. They're not letting anybody out on bond. They're making us all go to trial. They're telling us if you don't take this plea deal, we're going to supersede your indictment and charge you with more felonies, and you're going to get more time, and you're going to spend more time away from your family. So it's at this point, people are like, I'm standing for what I believe in. I don't believe I did anything wrong. I stood up for somebody who got hurt that day, and then now I got charged for doing that. And so some people are like, I'm fighting to the end, and then you just watch people just get broken down by this machine. They're like, because no matter what you want to do, you want to stand and fight as a man and fight for what you believe in. But then you pick up the phone and you call your wife, and she's like, "How can you tell me that you won't take this 7 years and you'd rather face 20 years and be away from me and your children?"
Yeah.
And so it's like you want to stand for what you believe in, but then on the other hand, it's like would seem common sense that you're getting this that you would want to take the less time. So people lost, Dan Caldwell's mom died, John Mellis's father died. I watched people go through divorces. I watched people lose their businesses. I watched them lose their homes. I watched people's family members testify against them on the stand. I watched people get abandoned by everybody they know because you know what it is like to follow a movement and to be persecuted or disbanded, discarded by your friends because of your political beliefs. And so multiply that by 10 and then being crushed by the government and being away from everybody, it was a tragedy and it's sad. And I believe that we all need to be compensated, but especially those men that suffered those losses, man. It is unacceptable that they had to go through that. And it was very difficult to watch, but I thank God that I got to be there to walk through them. It was an honor to suffer alongside those men is what I always say.
Shane, one of the things that struck me when I'm listening to these interviews with you and these guys, you guys were doing your homework. I don't have a lot of prison experience, so I don't know what you can do and what you can't do. But I was surprised that they were allowing you guys internet access to get data and to learn and to see what was going on. Talk about that.
Well, we had what was called intranet, so we couldn't access things on the outside. Like we had these tablets that you could pay 3 or 5 cents a minute to watch, so we could watch like Steve Bannon's War Room. We got Pluto TV, so any channel that you could get at home on Pluto TV, we also got it in there. It just cost us 5 cents a minute to watch. But then, as far as evidence goes, now our lawyers would bring us USB drives, and the DC DOC would provide us with a laptop where we could plug that hard drive or that USB drive in, and then we could open up the files and the videos that pertain to our case and view them. But they also provided another platform that was a tablet that gave us access to, I forget what the name of the program was, but it was a program that contained the 16,000 hours of the Capitol footage around January the 6th and the days before, and I think maybe the days after. So we could go in and like you were talking about the different movements of the different groups and these
Yeah.
different things. We could watch, we could pull up videos like on this side of the building or that side of the building and see kind of how things devolved. And so that's really how we started to uncover a lot of the truth. I could, for somebody who saw something, what's weird is I would tell you that I witnessed people being brutalized. I got brutalized and then reacted, right? Well, if you look at the guys that like before I even got there, the crowd standing there, they were victimized, brutalized, and
Yep.
or watched other people do the same, and then they reacted. And so the MO the same way through was the same all the way. Like even when I showed up later, it was still the same thing. So a majority of these guys being military, law enforcement, prison guards reacted the very same way that I reacted. I'm not going to stand by. I don't care if you're a leftist, a Marxist, what you are. I'm not going to stand by and watch anybody bleach you, and I don't care beat you. I don't care if it's the police or who it is. You know what I mean? I'm going to stand up for what I believe in, and I'm going to make the best moral decision that I can based upon my beliefs. And so it was a theme that ran across it, and being able to view that and being in there together was one of the biggest mistakes I think they made. They had us all in there together, and we could rally moral, and we could have Bible study, we could pray together, we could suffer alongside each other when people were dying. These other things, we could all be there and rally around that person. So it was something we started having my buddy Rob Morse, Lego Man. You should get a chance. You should interview him. He's a 82nd Airborne.
I watched some of his stuff last night. Keep going.
He's 82nd Airborne, 3 tours in Afghanistan, got out of the military, then went to Penn State, became a school teacher, graduated from Penn State, and then was teaching history 6 months later, January 6th. And then but he comes in with us in there, and he's just this vibrant young man and just a good spirit, good young man. And he organized these things with another guy, Jeff Sable, and I may be leaving out people, so forgive me if I did, but they started having this because they were researching how like the POWs in previous wars would keep morale up, and so they organized this theme called the Hopium Den, and they were putting together these like talent shows, and it was something that was special. I hope we get to reenact those things someday for the general public.
Well, you guys had a choir. How many of you guys were in there together?
Over the period of time, there was, I would say, the 30 and a half months that I was there in the DC jail, there was probably about 100 men through there. There was 100 men in there, and so we every night at 9 o'clock we would stop what we were doing, and we would sing the national anthem. And it was something we watched the BLM protests for the NFL and people kneeling during the anthem and all this stuff
Yeah.
that we felt was disrespectful, and so we turned that song into a rally song for us. And then next thing you know, we're calling outside to the vigil with Mickey Whithoff, Ashley Babbitt's mom, and now it's getting broadcast out there to the Freedom Corner, and there's live streamers out there picking that up off of a loudspeaker, and it's getting live streamed out to the nation, and then it picks up this momentum, and it's just this beautiful thing that people would write us letters telling us how every night at 9 o'clock they would turn their porch light on, and their husbands, wives, and children would stand together, and they would sing the national anthem with us every night at 9 o'clock, and another morale booster. And it was we then we realized like we can have an impact on people outside there, and they're supporting us, writing us letter or donating us so we can take care of our families or whatever. And it just grew this grassroots organic January 6th community that enabled us to continue to fight the good fight and rallied around us, helped us get better attorneys and just these different things. And so it was bad, as bad as it was, but there were some good things that were really, really good. I'm thankful that I got to be there and be there with those men. So
You would eventually get prosecuted and sent to a different jail. What did they finally prosecute you with, and where did you go?
I went to trial. I told them they offered me 92 to 115 months, and I told them that I'd love to consider their plea offer, but I don't negotiate with terrorists because yeah, because they were treating us like terrorists, and they did. They early morning raids with the FBI and SWAT and all that, and instead of just saying, "Hey, we need you to come down here and turn yourself in," but I went to trial, and they threw out one charge and but found me guilty of all counts. I don't remember if it was 9, 10, or 11, something like that. But they were asking for 232 months. They wanted to give me the terrorism enhancement for what? I don't know. The prosecutor told my judge I was one of the worst of the worst. They asked for 232 months. The judge gave me 84 months. He even told me, he said, "You guys say every one of these guys is the worst of the worst." And so they really lost credibility in a lot of the courts. But yeah, so I ended up going to prison. I got sent to FDC Philadelphia. And from there, I spent about a month there. Then they shipped me to Pollock, Louisiana. I witnessed two people die in a period of a few months over there. One was beaten to death by a cellie. Another one died of a fentanyl overdose with synthetic cannabinoids or spice. Just the drugs are just rampant in there. The violence is rampant in there, and it's just this feeling of deliberate indifference. And I feel like the officers feel like they didn't have top cover because they had a woke director at the very top. I can't remember her name, but she was more concerned about the guards using the proper pronouns for people as opposed
Yeah.
to investing in these people and making them better. But yeah, I eventually got shipped from there to Terre Haute, Indiana, where I finally got the word that President Donald Trump had pardoned me at 6:30 at night on January 20th.
Did they let you go immediately? Because in the days after that, there were some law enforcement or jails that were trying to push back and not allow people to be discharged.
So I got out at 1 o'clock in the morning. They told me at 6:30 I was being released. I didn't get released till 1 a.m. I do know that most people that were in federal custody that got pardoned were immediately released. If you were in the custody of the DC DOC, you were not. Now some of them did get released, but others were just held. And now I don't know The situation with some of those people had pending state charges, which is different because the president can pardon you for federal charges.
Right. Yes.
Want to dismiss state charges, you need a governor to do that. And so some people are held up. I believe Jeremy Brown's supposed to be getting out today. Hopefully, he's a special forces guy, but there's still some people in custody. And so, yeah, they drug their feet on letting everybody out.
You're now out and you're trying to help others. Talk about your foundation, Stand in the Gap. What your purpose and what your mission is.
We are moving forward with trying to help the January 6th guys get their lives back on track. We're working on a thing called Operation Memory Maker. Basically, what it is, it's a 3 to 5 day, all expense paid vacation for the guys who have been away from their families for at least I think if they did 1,000 days, they qualify for this program. But we're trying to give them an opportunity at no expense to them to rebond with their families and their children on a vacation and just unplug and do some time together as a family. And we're also going to work on providing health care for the guys, dental, medical, and all that, because the medical treatment in there is horrible. And then the credit repair. We want to try to fix the credit because people that got arrested usually all their credit got shot all the
Yep.
crap. So and then the other prong of the foundation is we're going to be working on justice reform because we all witnessed firsthand the conditions in the prisons and the DC jail, and we are passionate. All of us are passionate about going back and fixing all that and helping those people get treated with the humanity that we all know they deserve.
Are you optimistic with the appointments of Cash Patel and Bongino and people and Pam Bondi's attorney general? Do you feel positive about this?
Absolutely. I think these people are proven patriots and these people are proven competent and that they will be the disruptor that they have been to this point. I believe that who better to go after the DOJ and the deep state militant arm than Cash Patel, the person who discovered the Russia collusion hoax and investigated all that and uncovered all that. And Dan Bongino, God bless him, Secret Service and all that, he's about that life. And so I believe that these people are going to get in there and they're not going to do President Trump's will and his bidding.
Right.
They are going to take an objective look at things. And if they're going to be even-handed with the Lady Justice with the blindfold on, they're going to deliver non-biased, not a single tier of justice, equal for everybody. And that's where they messed up, is they were tilting it one way. Nobody got prosecuted for the Summer of Love, and they just went after us full bore. So
I read yesterday because I was looking at some comparisons to the George Floyd riots. When I'm here in LA, man, it was nuts. People were just walking. I mean, it was mayhem. And this is after COVID. You got to stand 6 feet apart, wear a mask, and all this. And now, next thing you know, everybody can just run straight up amok within cities. And I was reading in Minneapolis, 90% of the people who were arrested during that period, their charges were dropped over 90%. So this was not justice applied in a equal fashion.
no, not at all. Yeah, that's what they cost, over $12 billion, and I think over 12 deaths and all these different things. And we did like $2 million worth of damage to the Capitol. We didn't kill anybody. 4 protesters were killed, as a matter of fact, 0 police officers. And so just this contrast that, and you had politicians raising money for the bail fund to get them out of jail, and then they don't get prosecuted. And it's just like, people saw that. I thank God that all these things that we went through woke the American people up and gave them enough courage to step out in faith and elect President Trump for what I believe is the third time.
Yeah. Well,
President.
let me ask you this, and then we'll wrap this thing up because even after hearing your story, and there's just going to be some people out there, they're never going to sympathize with this. They're never going to allow themselves to look into this or that you guys had everything coming to you that happened. But if we put those people aside and we skip forward a couple of decades, what do you think history is going to say about January 6th, 2021? How do you think it's going to be viewed?
That's a good question. I hope that it's viewed as the last government entrapment operation, that it will be people who stood firm under pressure from the government, but were treated very poorly, and that those people bore fruit and took action to change the whole thing, from the prison system to the DOJ to the to the courts and everything else. And it brought in a new wave, which That's what I believe. We helped get President Trump back into office. I believe this is the turning point. This is where everything hinges around this and we move forward. And I think January 6th was like the first instance of that. And it kind of just happened along every other line behind that.
Well, I hope you're right. Shane, tell everybody how they can find you on social media, how they can find information about Stand in the Gap and your continued work.
Okay. Yeah, if you'll go to standinthegap.foundation, that's where you can go check out what we're doing for justice reform and for the J6 guys. If you want to follow me on social media, go to the real J6 Shane on X. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's the real J6 underscore US. And also, if you want t-shirts and gear that we have, it's on the realj6.com. We would appreciate you if you guys just come check us out, give us a follow. If you can throw us a buck or two, it'll give us the ability to continue to fight and work for prison reform and help these January 6 men get their lives back together.
Well, Shane, I appreciate that. And ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you who listen and watch my show. If you could do me a favor, if you could help a brother out, man, hit a like, give me a subscription, write a line or two, whether you agree with me or disagree. But all forms of engagement really help me, and I'm not asking you guys for much. So if you could do that for me, Michael Parker Media, I would really appreciate it. I think we're at episode 53 at this point. So just a like, a thumbs up, a good word means the world to me. Ladies and gentlemen, until the next time, keep your heart and your mind open.